Hello, the instructions here are specifically for someone who wants to create an audio book from a written book using Audacity. There's lots of features in Audacity, but in this I'm focusing entirely on what you need, which is a small subset of the whole amount, in order to be able to produce a good quality audio recording of a book. I'm assuming that you've already installed Audacity, which is free, and I'm basically focusing on using it with a PC or laptop or Windows type computer, in other words. But much of this applies whether you're using something else such as a Mac, and each computer is slightly different, so there's a little bit of configuring anyway. So let's get started, and let's concentrate on what you actually need, and you can ignore just about everything else on here. So first of all, we go up to the top here, and there's a panel which probably looks familiar to you because most of us are used to devices where you play and record. So you've got a pause button there, a playback button there, the green button, that the square is stop, and then this is skip to start or skip to end, and then finally the red record button. I'm sure all that looks fairly familiar from elsewhere. So what else do we need to look at? Well, skip this lot here, and then we come up to this microphone symbol, which is about recording. That comes up in several places, and over here we have the speaker level. These will tell you the strength of the signal that you're actually have got, or you set it to. I've already set up some of the levels because I'm creating this video and I didn't want the sound to be poor. But if you look at this microphone symbol here with a minus at this end and a plus at that, I've actually had to turn this down quite a bit to get a nice balanced signal, and I'm going to leave it there because of this recording, but I will highlight what you do to get it right in a minute. But for now I want to come down here and show you these four panels here. There are drop down menus, 1, 2, 3, 4. Starting with the first one. Now this is where I can't tell you precisely what yours will look at because each computer is different, but you're likely to have a number of choices here, and there's a bit of experimentation needed to find the right setting when you're using a microphone and headset. So if I click on this drop down here, this is set to Windows Direct. As I mentioned, I'm already using a Windows machine, and there are 3 choices there, and Windows Direct is the one I need here, but just to give you an idea what that's all about, Audacity can record off whatever kind of devices you've got on your computer, and typically you'll either record from a microphone, which I'm doing at the moment, or if you're maybe playing something over the internet and you want to capture the sound that's coming in, or you're playing off some other device on a computer, you'll probably need to set that to something else. So I'll show you in a minute how you can make sure you've got it set correctly. This one here, the next where the microphone symbol, you need to select the right device there. Now it's pretty obvious in my case here because it says microphone and that's what I'm using, but you might have more than one mic on your laptop or computer or desktop computer. For instance, lots of laptops have inbuilt microphones, but you probably prefer to use a headset for this to get a slightly better quality sound. That's what I'm doing, but you change your choices here until you find the one that's the one you want. Here is a drop down for stereo or mono. Stereo is a much more natural sound really. Most microphones record in stereo, playback is in stereo, so my advice would be leave that at stereo unless you've got very good reason to do otherwise. And then on the headphones, this is really for your playback. In this particular case, the choice is headphones, but if you've got speakers, obviously you might prefer to use that. Now, coming back up to the top here, what I didn't mention to start with is against this microphone button, and again indeed against the speaker button, you've got an L and an R, and all that does is stand for left and right channels, which you get if you're recording in stereo. So you know, the left channel is what comes out of your left headphone, and the right channel is what comes out the right headphone. Now, what you'll see on here is it says click to start monitoring, and I'm just clicked on that now, and as you can see, as I speak, the bar changes its appearance. It's green, which means the signal is safe and not distorted, and right up the far end it can go orange or even red, which would indicate some degree of distortion. Occasionally clipping the right hand end isn't a problem, but if it's up there all the time, you are going to have a distorted recording. And when I started off, before I actually made this recording, I had this little button here right up there somewhere, and I was getting lots of red, and if I did a test recording it all came out very distorted. So you do need to look at this bar and get it something like you're seeing here, and that's the way to get that adjusted. Now, what we're going to do now is to do a recording, and that means coming back to these controls here. What you'll see is as soon as I press record, you'll see two panels, horizontal panels, which are actually giving me a graphical representation of the sound, and what I expect to see is blue waves. So let's do that. Let's get started. I'm going to press red for record, and then as you can see here, it's moving, the little red lines moving along, and you can see the wave symbols for the recording. Now I can see visually that this is about right, because most of the time, apart from when I speak slightly too loudly, the waves don't go right up to the top or the bottom. They sort of in the middle somewhere. So I'm getting just a tiny bit of distortion when I'm speaking slightly too loud, but I'm going to leave that so you can hear that effect. But as you can see, in general, there's very obvious blue waves on both channels, and because I'm just talking, the two channels look very similar. Now the thing is that if you press the red record button, this one up here, and you don't see waves like this, maybe you just see a little blue line, what that means is that one of these settings up here is wrong, because it's not recording off your microphone. So if you've gone to this panel here, and you've set it to microphone, and you thought that was the right choice, but it's not working, then the chances are that this panel on the left here is wrong, and it's actually fundamentally trying to record from the wrong type of device on the computer. So by experimenting with this one and that one, you should, by a process of elimination, come up with something that's recording well and looks like this. If having tried the various combinations you can't get anywhere, then there's some more fundamental problem with a microphone or whatever, which is a bit beyond the scope of what I can cover in this particular piece. Now let's assume that we've carried on with the recording successfully, and we've recorded what we want to record, and so at that point we go up to the top panel here and we press stop. And now we've stopped our recording. Now Audacity's got huge facilities. It's very good for doing all sorts of edits and everything else, but I just want to concentrate on the bare essentials that you need to do your recording. Now typically when you're making an audio recording, the chances are that there might be the odd glitch or mistake. You might suddenly need to cough, which is very annoying, but if you're going to cough, you can always press the pause button and then carry on, and that works well. But often it's easier if you actually pause and then edit out any mistake later. And particularly when you're reading, if you don't say something quite as you meant, or you make a mistake with it, the best thing to do is pause, say something like stop, re-record, or whatever you want to say, because that's something for you to tell yourself. Pause again, and then start again at the point before you made your mistake. When you're playing it back, provided you put those pauses in and something to signify the problem, you should be able to identify the bit of the recording that you want to get rid of where you had your mistake. And if we look at this screen here, you see here the line's pretty flat, so that's typically where there's been a pause or a bit of silence. So whereas here, where this big blue blob is obviously was quite a bit of noise. So generally the look of this will give you a clue as to where the gaps were, and will enable you then to identify that piece and remove it. Well, how do you do that? Well, it's quite simple really. You use your cursor to highlight the piece that you want to get rid of, and you then go to the edit menu, and you can do a cut, and that gets rid of it. But I've jumped the gun there a bit, haven't I? Because I haven't talked about playback, and obviously if I'm pressing playback, which I'll do here, then I can listen to playback, and I can find where the mistake is, and more precisely do that selection. Now, so you run through your whole recording. If you make lots and lots of mistakes, it's probably best to stop and start again. But if there's just one or two glitches, you can edit them out quite easily, provided you remember to make that pause when you make the mistake, so you can easily find it and deal with it. So having finished your recording and maybe edited out a few bits and pieces, now you want to save it. Now, important thing to understand here is that Audacity has a thing called projects, which is basically an individual recording, which in the case of a book is probably a chapter, and you can save these individually. So on this file menu at the top here, if you do save project, which I'm doing now, this little warning comes up. I've done some before. I'm just going to call this test 3, not very original, but test 3. And I've done an OK there because I'd already done a test 3. And I've now got a project, but I haven't got an audio file. I mean, the project's holding this information, but if I want an audio file, I have to actually do an export. So I go into the file menu again, and then I'll move down to where it says export, and then you see a series of choices. Now, typically you will want to export as one of the very popular audio file formats, and probably the most popular choices are MP3, which is at the top of the list there, and WAV. WAV is quite popular on PCs. MP3 is pretty universal. Either of those are good formats, and it's almost a matter of personal choice. So I can say I'm going to export to MP3. I can click on that. I can it wants to save it in this particular directory. I'm going to call this test 4 MP3. I'm going to press. Oh, by the way, there's some things you can set here. This is just set to standard quality. Normally that's fine for what we're doing. But you just have a quick look at these settings, and if your recording doesn't come out as nicely as you want it to, then this is the place to go and change things. So I'm going to do save then, and then what happens with most of the audio formats, you can actually add data that belongs with the recording. So the artist name, you can put your name in there, and track title and so on. If you're recording a book, you'd probably track title might be chapter 1, and the next one would be chapter 2, and so on. The album title would be the title of the book, and so on. So and then you can put the other stuff in there as you see fit. I would say put as much in there as you can that makes sense, but you don't have to put anything. I can just press OK, and what it's going to do is quickly export this audio file to this particular MP4 file, which I can then take off and use elsewhere. So we're just about there with this particular thing, getting you started. I would recommend that if you're going to be reading the book, you get the book ready to read beforehand. It can help if you've got it on the screen and you've converted into narrow columns, because it can help with the reading, but you can just prop the book up against the computer and read away to your heart's content. When recording a chapter of a book, then stating perhaps the obvious, you start off by saying chapter 1, blah blah blah, whatever it is, and then start reading, and off you go. So that concludes this brief session on how to use Audacity if you want to create an audiobook from a written book. Thanks for listening.